My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with STEM educator, television producer, and Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient, Justin Shaifer. Justin, it's great to sit down with you.
Pleasure to be here, Drew.
Absolutely. I'm ready to get into a whole bunch of questions about your career, but I feel like the best place to start by me asking you to define your career to someone who may not have heard of your work. You're leading in the world of STEM education and the evolution of the information age. How do you describe your career to anyone learning about your work for the first time?
Many times when I'm having a conversation with someone on an elevator, I'll tell them I'm like the modern day interpretation of Bill Nye the Science Guy. We have a studio here in Los Angeles called Fascinate House, where I do stuff on camera, explaining educational science concepts. We also use a lot of innovative technology to achieve that goal, such as virtual production and generative AI, to really change the immersion level of educational content that we make for people all over the world.
Every generation needs their own Bill Nye. It's a very important role. I'm happy that you're stepping into that position. I know you best from your TED Talk, which has amassed 500,000 views on YouTube alone. And in that video, you speak about the learning patterns of Gen Z. As of this recording here, 5 years have passed since that TED Talk, and now a large percentage of Gen Z has joined the workforce. How have some of your observations of generational differences evolved over that time?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting doing that assessment of Gen Z and then watching it play out in real time. Some of the most interesting findings, I think the similarities in self-directed learning are still there. We still find Gen Zers learning on their own instead of in traditional classroom settings, and being using what I call YouTube University or Kahoot or Duolingo, but it's even gotten more immersive because a lot of these educational platforms now have a companion AI that will teach the kids on a personalized level, such as Duolingo Max, which is a personalized language tutor that's AI powered. But some of the differences I've seen, something that I wasn't as aware of when I gave that talk years ago, was Gen Z's emphasis on authenticity. I think that I self-identify as a millennial, but I'm kind of right on the boundary between millennials and Gen Zers. But when I was coming up and making content and consuming content on social media, a lot of times you wanted your stuff to look the nicest, right? You want to have the best cameras, the cleanest audio, because that's what we're used to. You want to make your stuff look like TV. Well, what I learned in the past few years is that Gen Z would be turned off by that aesthetic, because when it feels overly produced, it seems like someone's not being their real self, or they might be trying to sell you something overtly. And what works much better with the Gen Z demographic, whether that's, convincing them of something, if it is actually trying to sell them, or even educate them, is giving them that authentic take. Whether that means lowering the production value of your setup with like a smartphone, or that just means having a different delivery than the TV host newscaster style delivery that I think I was used to seeing growing up, so that Gen Z feels like you're actually talking to them directly. And so that was a new genre of presentation that I had to master, to make media that reaches younger people.
Yeah, cutting out everything artificial. I think it's very true, especially when you think about how some of the most popular TikTok stars with millions and millions of followers still will shoot from their phone 5 million followers into their game. So I definitely understand the appeal of authenticity. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
mentioned AI, because in this day and age, you can't talk about technology education without talking about AI. And right now it's developing at an unbelievable rate. Less than 2 years ago, prompt to image AI was in its infancy. And now OpenAI just revealed Sora, which is a prompt to video AI model that aims to mimic cinematic quality video. Now, with things moving so quickly, how do you approach tech education when the things that you teach about could be wildly different a couple months from now?
I think it's really interesting, this growth curve of innovation, right? It's become more and more exponential as time has gone on, to the point where I think of a couple things. The recent CEO of NVIDIA, which is the company powering a lot of these AI platforms, said that coding skills aren't a necessity. Like 10 years ago, and even 5 years ago, all these STEM education programs were pushing coding knowledge so hard. But because of AI, these models have adapted to language, large language models, and using text-based prompts to actually code things on what are called no-code platforms. So that, whole paradigm is now shifted. I think about this when I'm thinking about what skills I want to encourage young people to learn. And I think the hard skills will come and go. And I think we have to have kind of a more almost transient take on some of the hard skills that we used to value so deeply. And that, we learn them today, but we need to be okay with divorcing them tomorrow, learning new user experiences, learning new applications, situations. So the skill that I think that's required for that is, of course, adaptability, right? So you need to be able to be flexible in your thinking, and that comes from that experience of just trying stuff over and over again, never getting too committed to a particular technology or skill set, and just constantly learning new things. And I think that's what this next generation of students and workers is going to have to deal with.
Certainly. That's definitely one of the positives of AI, but I'd love to ask you about one of the negatives of AI. And that's as AI continues to develop, one of the biggest issues facing young media consumers is advanced deepfakes that are created to spread misinformation. The reasons behind the misinformation could range from just dumb, harmless fun to far more harmful motives. What do you say to audiences young and old that need to become more online literate on this specific subject?
Man, I think it goes in two directions. On one side, as educators, as teachers, we need to ensure that our students have much more developed critical thinking skills at younger ages, right? I got a science degree in undergrad, and they taught us so much about analyzing and discerning information and skepticism, right? I think at a younger age, students must be familiarized with this process of critical thinking. Now, on the other side, I think part of the responsibility is going to also rest on these massive billion-dollar platforms that are profiting so substantially to make sure that the things that they're being that creators are putting out on their platforms are truly digitally authenticated. And that's going to be an interesting process to see teased out. I've seen some companies developing AI tools that in some ways better than humans can detect whether or not something is actually made by AI or not. And I think another piece of that is NFTs, right? The non-fungible tokens we originally think of as these online art tokens were actually this next generation form of digital authentication on the blockchain. So that technology is still, I think, nascent. It obviously is stigmatized because of a lot of things that happen with the NFT space. But I can imagine a derivative of that technology actually being used to assist in digital authentication. But that is a huge part of this problem and a huge part of the solution.
Absolutely. I agree with what you said about it becoming kind of this stigmatized creative space, or not, so not creative space, technological space, just because of certain scammy things that went on with NFTs. But how do you think it's going to change tech education when these young minds have to be immediately thrust into a world where, hey, you need to absolutely make sure that this picture is authenticated, that it's a real news story that happened and not someone just trying to manipulate you online?
I think we're already seeing some of the effects of that. Like I could see, I mean, it's been interesting and somewhat sad to me that, recently I've seen a lot of very well produced media content put out. And if it just looks too impossible to make or it's too high quality, people will be like, man, that's just AI, right? And so our skepticism is kind of, even among the young people, almost swung far in the opposite direction where we don't believe anyone's making anything anymore because the idea is that people can just lazily make stuff with AI today. Man, I think it's going to be a conundrum for these young people. But I think that, again, as long as they're remaining adaptable and learning those critical thinking skills, I think they can persevere through this time. I mean, we're all consuming content on the internet today, and, or most of us are. And, it's about finding those good sources too, right? Teaching those young people what is a trusted source of information, scientific journals. Some of the more boring stuff that isn't as clickbaity or isn't as easy to read can sometimes provide much more reliable and trustworthy sources of information.
Absolutely. It's going to be a evolving world of youth education. But speaking of youth education, in your personal production studio, you're currently working on technology that you say is on the intersection of technology and media and pointing it towards youth education. What current projects of yours are you most excited about right now?
Yeah, so there's a really cool astrophysics project I'm working on. It's called A Second Home. And I actually filmed it with a friend of mine who's an astrophysicist that studies exoplanets. These are planets that are outside of our solar system. So he traditionally films like these vertical style TikTok educational videos about these different planets. And I was like, let's take that to the next level. So we put him inside of the planets. We follow him with these cameras as he puts his spacesuit on and travels across these planets to show what it would look like to find a second home for humanity and whether or not these exoplanets fit the bill. It's a really fun project that we shot that required, green screen tech, generative AI, and a lot of other cool technologies. But my vision for that is revolutionizing popularizing educational media content with virtual production. You could imagine if you can take a subject and put them anywhere with this technology, and virtual production is the same technology that they use to make shows like The Mandalorian, where you see them on all these different planetary surfaces. Or if you can put your person on or your subject on any of these places, we could shrink someone down Magic School Bus style and make a show inside of the human body, right? Next to all these organs. Or we could do stuff in Antarctica or other hard to reach locations that, would be difficult to bring a whole, or expensive even to bring a whole film crew to. But now we can make really high quality educational content with virtual production. So that is what my company's been incubating at my studio at Fascinate House. And I couldn't be more excited to share those best practices with educators, because I think there's a lot to learn about potentially building a cost-effective virtual production lab in your school, right? It's not that expensive. And most of the equipment, if you have like a media entity at your school, they'll probably have a lot of the equipment that you need. And just for a few more additional purchases, you can help prepare students for careers of the future, because there's a lot of major job opportunities that are coming out in the line of virtual production since these innovations have come to fruition.
Wow. I feel like immersion is going to get a lot of young minds interested in the STEM field. And it's cool that you're already kind of marketing this towards schools, especially if it's a cost effective solution, because one of the things that you speak about very often is the importance of diversity in the STEM world and how you want to see STEM opportunities spread to as many young people as possible. In your time in this space, what positive changes have you seen and what do you think still needs to be done?
Man, I think the coolest thing about, being in the STEM advocacy space today, even versus I'd say 6 years ago when I first started, is that it's a lot less difficult to sell STEM to kids, right? I think most kids, whether that's through initiatives that are in their schools or through media, they know that these are the careers of the future. These are the careers that pay well. They know that they use their iPhone every day, and the person that makes the stuff on their iPhone is probably a well-paid person, right? So that used to be ice I had to break with the kids before I could even convince them that they could get into STEM. So now they know that these are awesome careers and awesome opportunities. What I always am encouraging young people to do is become creators in the STEM ecosystem, not just content creators that are creating content on social media platforms. That is an important part of being a creator, but having the creator mentality is using your creativity and gaining the technical skills to make your own platforms. And so those are some of the things I want to empower young people with, because a lot of times, it's easy. I mean, when I was a kid, I was addicted to video games. It's easy to just fall into the trap of being a consumer and stagnating there. But as a kid, you have so much creative potential, so many dreams, and that can be best used, especially for a lot of the diverse young people who may not find themselves in empowered positions, to take that creative energy, that ingenuity, and that innovative spirit, combine it with technical skill, and make stuff that changes the world.
Very well said. Justin, you touched on this topic already, but we always end these interviews by asking just a very blanket, broad question. What advice do you have for young people? And feel free to answer however you'd like.
So, I think about, the journey that got me to where I'm at today. And I was out of my comfort zone so much. I'm still out of my comfort zone all the time. I'm running a marathon this Sunday. I'm always pushing those boundaries. And so, the thing that I always say to young people is attack discomfort until you lack discomfort. Because, me doing even something like public speaking, which is a very common fear all over the world, it's something that I had a lot of anxiety with growing up. As a kid, I remember the first time I publicly spoke, seeing my heartbeat or feeling my heartbeat and the tears coming out of my eyes. I can remember that at 8 years old, feeling that way. I just kept speaking over and over again on different platforms until I felt more comfortable and confident. And, 200 talks later, now doing this in front of thousands of people on a monthly basis, I don't even feel that nervousness or that heartbeat. I just get excited to share my message with people. So, there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be gained on the other side of that discomfort. So attack it until you lack it.
Attack discomfort. Well said. Well, that is going to conclude our conversation with Justin Shaifer. Justin, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Drew. This has been awesome.